God will often align his chosen people, or just truly anointed or divine people, to situations when there is such an imbalance. And before a chosen one has answered the call, before they have recognized and gone through their own period of healing and accepted the call over their life, you got to pick up the call. And you actually have to go through the healing. It's crucial. It's crucial. The reason it is crucial, though, is because you have to heal those wounds. You have to be able to extract that wisdom. But as you're extracting that wisdom, you're also gaining the fruits of your spirit and the gifts of your spirit, which are going to be a requirement for your mission, for your destiny. Remember, destinies are authored by God. To even believe in a destiny, you have to believe in God. Okay, so right away, with that objective truth, you know that destiny swapping is bullshit. Okay? Most people who have perpetuated this really false intention. Or narcissists have delusions of grandeur. But what happens is the people that start to embody that energy, they start to accept it. They will start to glamorize literally everything. Like a Ted Bundy or Charles Manson level of mastery, even in an Alex or Crawley level of mastery. They have worked so hard on observing other people, observing their reactions to the things they do, the very covert, subtle things that they do. And they observe that as a means of control. And so they have basically earned a master's in controlling other people, controlling perception, controlling reality. But these people often are great speakers. They really are. In some of these groups, like Nexium, they will market around controlling perception, controlling language, hypnotic, magnetic, and sort of subtle art of negging. And see, again, even in that though, they repackage it and they rebrand it. People have a very hard time with this. When you're still connected to your humanity, this is the hardest thing for people to wrap their head around. Don't have a particular religious assignment, even if, you're not a believer of anything specific, it's still going to be hard for you to understand because you're not supposed to, because it's evil. And especially if you're somebody that's very inquisitive and you will seek out the truth by any means necessary. I will actually do whatever I have to do. In my particular situation, this required me to go into a Mason lodge. This required me to speak to a pagan witch, to speak to a practitioner, and approach in a way, and other people too, by the way, that I wouldn't necessarily adopt their beliefs. I wouldn't agree with their beliefs. Whatever it is, that was irrelevant. I don't necessarily have to use anything as it was intended by the person who adopted those beliefs. Same thing with, the people that report on cults and things like that. They're educating us so we better understand. But how they actually get so deep into that, they've disconnected from their own humanity. And in order to reconnect with humanity, they potentially would have to expose things, talk about things, go through pain, the shadow they have to walk through, the valley they have to go through, to them is truly endless. The people that are coming back around now, and they're once again, marketing their position, seeking some kind of financial gain or profit off of something that was evil. Okay, and I this isn't any kind of judgment on them. It has nothing to do with me. Not really. Because they still hold some belief that what they did, they were the victim of. Okay? The Jezebel spirit has a real hard time with this. Okay? Again, they are programmed so deeply and so disconnected from their own humanity that they don't even really see the light. Because again, they're disconnected from their own humanity. And trying to make sense of it is going to lead you down an endless path, keep you stuck in the valley. And if you've ever dealt with a narcissist, or if you've ever been in a trauma bond, if you've had a narcissistic parent, if you've had a cult family that you come from, they want you stuck in that valley. They do. And certain closed cultures, closed religious beliefs, their ideologies also, they make leaving that valley very difficult. And it's unfortunate that that happens. But when too many people are potentially moving that direction, when essentially, collectively, overarching, there is too much dissonance being created, there is too much of a collective drain of humanity's energy. So when you think of humanity's energy from like a global scale, we have courage, integrity, selfless service, loyalty, honesty, creativity, unity, all of these beautiful parts that God was so intentional in designing, put into his treasure, which is humanity, which is all of us, even non-believers, even people that don't believe in the exact same thing. You know, if they believe in Buddha, Muhammad, Jesus Christ, collectively, there is a creator, there is a source. Too much of that energy is being drained from humanity. The vibration, collectively, gets very low. Very, very low. The parts of humanity that create that unity through situations, whatever it is, whatever the qualities are too that you consider your best qualities as an individual, when that collective energy is being drained, separations are being created, and fear becomes the higher emotion. Shame becomes the higher emotion. Control starts becoming very overwhelming. When that happens, it doesn't allow for people to exemplify the best parts of their humanity. And just in a natural way. I'm not even talking about like the internet or social media or anything like that. I'm talking about in a natural way. Down to helping somebody out that got a flat tire. Going out of your way to drop off something to a neighbor that's not feeling well. Just in general, the natural connections that people make, because we are here to work together. If you have that level of separation, that level of control, that level of fear, nobody's going to actually evolve or learn. So it can actually affect the level of evolution. And of course, you sprinkle in artificial intelligence into the mix here, which by the day, I am adamantly growing very opposed to. Like the more and more I understand and what I'm receiving combined with what I'm seeing, I'm like, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. It's not artificial intelligence all the way around, because I do believe there is some benefit to it, but the way it is wild and out, right out the gate, wild and out. I actually believe that the hierarchies know this. It's a real problem. This is definitely going to take humanity finding their own solution, and then the majority gravitating to that solution. I actually think I have a fairly decent hold on how that is going to happen. It's just a matter of who's the genius that actually picks it up first. If any investors want to talk to me about that, I'm happy to just take a small portion of your finances to give it to you. If humanity isn't putting in the work, creating those subtle shifts the right direction, that's when you're going to see divine intervention. But because people don't truly understand divine timing and what that means, and unless you have a divine appointment and you have answered the call and you have done the work and you continue to do the work, you're not going to see the bigger picture right away. Right around 2019, 2020, when things really started to shift, and obviously it started with the pandemic, anyone who was a free thinker, anyone who had the ability to be in observation, be wise, they would have to have a pretty decent level of intelligence, a decent level of awakening, not woke. Okay, don't get this twisted, not woke, but a decent level of awakening to see the truth, even if they couldn't see, through all the weeds and the fog and the illusions of the matrixy system. They had the ability to recognize the shit just didn't make sense. It truly just didn't even make any sense. I am quite certain that every single chosen person probably challenged this in their own way. And it might have been at different levels of challenging. Just the whole thing, okay? And likely, this started to create a separation. Some people were let go from their jobs. Some people were shunned by their families. Some people were rejected by social groups. Whatever it is, okay? And C, you would have maybe not right away, but you would have had, at least now, the ability to understand that that was actually so intentional by God. So intentional. And for me, it wasn't like any kind of being a rebel or going against the grain or anything like that at all. I just didn't see it necessary for myself. That was my whole perspective. It was I just don't agree. I've never done the whole real vaccine thing. I haven't done the vaccine for my kids. I've never even had the flu. And I'm just relatively in general a pretty healthy person. I'm not against medicine, but I believe that there's a whole lot more that people could be doing. Their own personal advocacy, their own personal wellness. And that is a belief that I've had my entire life, which actually started probably right around the time that my mom surprised me with a visit to a hospital where she falsely accused my father of SA and then took me to a hospital where I was actually traumatized and left me there, all in an effort to continue to drive a narrative that she was creating when she was well on her way to sacrificing my dad. And that right away, because I was telling the medical professionals in that place that my mom was lying. It was my dad never did anything to me. I was horrified, as a child. And also too, this has me understanding and being able to further connect with my child right now that they're trying to run the same play on, which is actually truly so sick and evil, and why I will never let this go, and why I am going to sue anybody who continues to allow this to go on. I'm going to sue the absolute shit out of you, because I would never, ever, ever allow monsters to get away with hurting my child. It's part of my purpose in this world. And see, because I had already broken the curses, there's nothing else that they could do to me. So again, what did they do? They came for my children. Big no-no. But a part of going through the work that I had to go through, which had to be started through my separation from my career. I was in VetMed for 25 years. I worked for the same organization for 15. And so, you could look at COVID for what COVID was right on the surface. But what it did for me through my self-awareness and through my observation was be able for me to recognize how I was coming out of alignment with the core values of that organization. And again, if you don't have self-awareness, if you want to stay a perpetual victim, you're not going to be able to reach this. And, sometimes that's just the way it is in this lifetime. But for me, I had to start to understand that. And it was for me to actually let go eventually. But I had to first recognize, like, okay, this isn't my company. This isn't my organization. I didn't create this. Like, I am an employee here. So ultimately, I had to follow those rules. And I was a leader in that hospital. So whatever their rules were, I had to abide by those. And I had to set the tone for my team. But it didn't stop me from observing sort of the really unrealistic expectations they had. It didn't stop me from understanding what that was doing to the leadership team in the hospital, the additional burden that the policies that they were putting in place created for not only me, but for the other clinical managers and the other leadership team. It's sort of an unattainable expectation. And again, this isn't just a one-person problem, okay? This was the nature of the collective energy, the collective, and when I say collective, I mean like humanity as a whole, where you can't just blame one person. It's like an intention that was set out, and people like just had to adjust, had to pivot, had to, make quick decisions and choices or whatever, okay? And so while I was in observance of that, I still wasn't in compliance with it because I didn't have a choice. I was an employee. But once I came through that and I could extract that wisdom, I had already given gratitude to that entire experience because it was an amazing experience that I needed to have. I had to, be able to understand advocacy for the voiceless and, standing in a place of truth and integrity and gaining that leadership experience and all that, because I was going to be aligned to challenging authority. And see, even before I knew it, in the background of my life, there were people that understood this. And they started to subtly program me to believe that that was something that was wrong with me, that I was strong-willed. Notice this too with the Jezebel spirit, especially mothers, like old Jezebels. They will often start rejecting their children in a very subtle way and wanting to create a label for them to give an excuse for their behavior. So if a child is just naturally responding to not being cared for, not being validated, not being nurtured, not being loved, not being provided for, just generally not feeling safe, a child is going to behave a certain way. A parent, either a mother or a father, that can't take accountability for that is constantly going to be looking at and pointing the finger at everybody else and trying to find a reason to give an excuse for why their child is the way that they are. Is through doctors, medicine, the juvenile system. All of the Jezebel spirits or parents that can't take accountability, have no self-awareness, and also do not want to make the necessary adjustments will do this. Constantly trying to get a diagnosis put on them, or again, through the justice system, anything to deflect from their responsibility, or them having to actually do the work that a parent should be doing. Now, sometimes on a smaller scale, which is becoming a very large problem in our country from my perspective, because people do not take the time to observe their children, but also to observe themselves, they are very quick to just jump on whatever a doctor will jump on with them. And one of the ways that this has been done is through the prescription of medicine. And before I say this, I just want to say I'm not against Western medicine. I am not against the treatment of any diagnoses, and this is not a sweeping judgment or statement on anybody else. It's just literally a perspective, an offering of a perspective. Again, I always tell people, chuck it in the fucking bucket. Okay, if it doesn't feel good, if you don't like it, you don't have to listen. I think we should create the freedom of listening, because everybody just wants to keep going to the freedom of speech because they have an intentional effort to suppress and silence people as a method of control. But the freedom to listen, you don't have to listen. You really don't. There's a choice there, where you get to use your free will. People will see their children. And because this most recently just happened with my son and my son's dad. Now, granted, I, once again, did not know that they had this whole plot going on in the background at the initiation of this, okay? Just thought Nick was being slow about it and not wanting to take accountability and just literally being his typical stubborn, very narrow-minded, very basic thought processing self. And of course, when he gets validated in being that way, because he has somebody who's acting out of jealousy, acting out of whatever they're acting out of, that's going to drive that intention. That's going to empower that intention. ADHD, autism, any kind of neurodivergency whatsoever. When anybody goes through any kind of trauma or they're experiencing trauma, especially if they do have a predisposition to a neurodivergency, based on the current understanding of neurodivergency, right? Because when is the last time typical was measured, first off, okay? But sticking with that sort of blueprint, if you are not observing and well aware and taking a broad look at what is happening in that child's environment, even an adult environment, okay? And a child is experiencing some sort of trauma, they are going to withdraw within themselves to disconnect from their reality. It is a coping mechanism. This is what they do. So what happens though, when they withdraw within themselves, naturally, they're not going to be pay attention to what's in their physical reality because they're withdrawing within themselves to soothe themselves because they want to disconnect from what's happening in the outer reality. It commonly be recognized as dissonance, which it is dissonance. And anytime anybody goes through trauma, it is dissonance that they're going through, as self-preservation. It's like the body literally trying to protect the soul from whatever the outer experience is. This is how PTSD happens. A lot of the times, this can be interpreted as neurodivergency. And again, it might be, or they might develop neurodivergency because of having to do this. But it's going to make it very difficult in a child's environment. It's going to make it very obvious in a child's environment when they're not paying attention, when they're not able to stay to task, when they're struggling to do things on time, do things for themselves. And depending on how understanding you are of this, depending on, most importantly, how accountable and aware you are as a parent, this can very much determine how the child responds to you, to their environment, and ultimately is able to reconnect with their reality. Neurodivergency, a lot of people do this, okay? So don't be triggered. Again, freedom of listening. So with our current system, the way that diagnosing ADHD, ADD, even autism, the way that the system is set up currently, typically you will have one doctor that handles medication, and then another provider that might handle the cognitive therapy part of it, the follow-through part of it. You might even have just one general provider that oversees the entire thing. Too much of an availability to just get medication and treat the child. But what happens in that system is that a child develops a dependency on that medication because the reality is not changing. So there's still going to have to be dissonance there, but they might even tend to be more focused in the environment of dissonance. You understand? So let's say, I actually have a theory about this as well, as far as like some of the gamer tech bros. This isn't directed at you, but I do have a theory about this, just from observing my child. When they're doing that, especially for boys, they might focus on something like the iPad or video games, but if you're giving them medication, they're going to be like, like really focus is like, and if they are allowed to carry this into teenage years, adulthood, and there's not an authority figure, an adult, a parent, a provider who is putting boundaries around those things, then they're going to tend to get toxic within it and be very focused. Now, if they're highly intelligent, also like my child, just saying, they might become very good at it, like whatever they're doing. Again, Elon, my counterpart, who else? Mr. Beast, I think, is one of them too. These are people who become very good at one part of something, okay? Not that that's all that they're good at, but just in general, they sort of climb to the heights of a certain part of what they become really good at. But likely, it started with some level of dissonance and also trauma. An adult, an authority figure, a good parent, a self-aware parent, a curse breaker, has to be accountable and has to be willing to be accountable. Has to be willing to take responsibility for not being in better control of that child's environment. And when I say control of this child's environment, I don't mean like, you get them a bigger TV. I don't mean you go get them a puppy or a better computer. That's not what I mean. If you are a self-aware parent and you are responsible for helping that child come back into their reality, what you are responsible for is creating safety. And see, safety can mean a lot of things. And a lot of people have been programmed to believe that it means, a VPN, a guard dog. But in terms of like the parental-child relationship, safety means being willing to adjust to the child's needs. Being willing to go into the depths with a child. Being willing to say you're sorry. Being willing to take accountability. Being willing to pivot or adjust to whatever that child needs in the moment. Let's say you have a lot of chaos in your household. Let's say you have a narc or a witch that lives with you. Let's say you've made some big changes to your family system. Let's say, you're trying to combine families, or, your Uncle Eddie is coming in for the holidays and just creating a whole mess. That is going to cause that child's dissonance, especially if they have a predisposition to it, to sort of flare in those moments. So being accountable for their diet. And this doesn't mean forcing them to eat like, all vegetables, all fruits, all of that. No, it just means put your iPad down, come sit with me at the table, talk to me, have a real experience with me, connect with me, be available to listen to that child. Whatever that child has happening, be more flexible, be willing to adjust whatever you need to adjust to meet the child in their reality. And most people don't want to do this because it would require them to be accountable. It would require for them to say, okay, yeah, there's a lot of arguing, there's a lot of changes. Whatever I'm doing could potentially be actually causing this appearance of ADHD, of dissonance, whatever it is. This became very apparent to me personally when Nick decided to go through, my son's dad, when he decided to go through like the first totally pointless court case, okay? Because again, we're talking about people who will weaponize anything they can. And so obviously, when we're going through that first completely pointless court case, and then naturally, my mother, the puppeteer, has to come in and add trauma to the entire situation. like, can't just stay in the boundary, on the other side of the boundary that's been placed for her, because she had a plan. All right, going to grab a hold of anything that they can. So Nick tried to create this whole thing around my son having ADHD. Okay, at that time he was like in first grade, second grade. Diagnosing a child at that age, to me, makes absolutely no sense. That child has not even had their psyche fully formed. Okay, so if they're demonstrating some form of dissonance, there is likely, more than likely, probably something in their reality. Well, when your parents are going through a pointless custody case and your grandmother is creating a bunch of drama unnecessarily, overstepping boundaries, creating a bunch of conflict that is not necessary, and your mom is constantly having to hold up this boundary, it's like, hey, because people are trying to bulldoze over her life and project a bunch of hate and evil at her that is not necessary, and have people within the structure of like a school system that are ill-informed, that are making inappropriate comments, like my son's teacher at this time. And this isn't anything against her personally, but she was 26 years old. This was her first time teaching. Okay, first time teaching. So naturally, my son is having a difficult time paying attention, and, he's challenging authority, and the teacher has to repeat things. So then when we go to a conference, the teacher mentions having him tested for ADHD. No teacher is qualified to even make that suggestion. Period. That is not even within the realm of qualifications. She can give an observation of the child's behavior, but to even suggest a diagnosis is inappropriate. It just is. Now, I didn't hold this against her at the time. She's 26 years old, okay? I grew up a neurodivergent, borderline autistic, okay? And I raised a child by myself. Textbook, ADHD. Textbook, neurodivergency. So I'm pretty well versed. My son's dad likes to think that this makes me a dummy about the whole thing, that I can't claim to be an expert, but actually... it makes me more qualified than anyone who hasn't lived with it or raised an entire child with it. Like, there is actually some validity in that. You'll notice when people can't actually honor you or give you credit for your wisdom, for your knowledge, for the benefit of which you add, especially to your own child's life, you notice that's a red flag of somebody who is bitter and angry. You can't argue with it. Again, willful ignorance. But in this case, because I wanted to be flexible and just, there's one of these times, you just sort of take it on the chin. It's like, okay, whatever you want to do, fine. And so the family provider did the test or whatever, and he came back on the very low end, okay? Very low end of ADD. Not ADHD, but ADD. But borderline at that point, okay? And so she gave some instructions on things to try. His diet, monitoring his activity, getting him extra exercise, monitoring and minimizing his time on video games, putting parameters around television and video games. Nick did not want to comply with those things. And so naturally, that's going to create even more of an imbalance for William, because he's with us, pretty much 50-50, even though as a residential parent. If you are doing what's in the best interest of your child, the first thing you need to do is align as co-parents. But if you have an ulterior motive, which in fact he did and still does, and so does his wife, who literally doesn't even get an opinion on this subject because it's my child, not yours. When it comes to my child's health, and well-being overall, that's that bridge of connection and trying to create peace with these people. So I'm not going to be rude. If his wife has some suggestions or something to offer, I was open to it. I actually asked her for it. That's fine. But when it comes down to decision making, don't ever think you're going to step over a boundary with my kids. And as an adult, if you ever feel like you have the right to overstep a parent's boundaries on the education or medical treatment of another person's child, there is something very wrong with you. Very wrong with you. And you need to go get yourself some mental health therapy, because that's not even normal. I don't care who you are. That's not normal. Nobody like gave you that right. It's like my mom, when my daughter did go on medication, because she was on medication when she was younger and it did not turn out good. And then once her and I started going down that journey together, after I took accountability, was willing to make the necessary changes in her environment, got her the therapy that she needed, and had her talk with her provider, because by this time my daughter was old enough to articulate her emotions. She was able to do that. My son didn't have that ability. He still doesn't have that safety in his environment right now to do that. So, my mother, even at this time, because she had an opinion, had the audacity to call my daughter's provider behind my back while I was at work and have a discussion saying she thought my daughter was at risk for self-deletion. Okay. Nurse and medical assistant, because both my kids had gone to this same provider's office pretty much their whole lives. She knew me well, actually, so she called me at work and she was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, and we do have to follow up because, you know, that's a part of her job. And I was like, what's up? She told me my mom called there and wanted information about my daughter's medical stuff. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, I thought it was pretty weird. I told her that like that was against privacy and like we can't do that, and she should check with you if she has questions. But I did want to check on Melina, make sure everything was good. I was like, well, she had like 4 friends over and they were up till like 3:00 in the morning making a mess out of my living room and making TikTok videos for like 14 hours straight. I think that's a risk at this time. I was like, she's like, yeah. She's like, but it didn't strike me that Melina would be at risk at that. She's a pretty confident kid. And I was like, yeah, she definitely is. So that was the end of that. Well, then of course, this was one of the first stages where I had to eventually, just a little while later, had to go no contact with this woman because it was showing how out of control she was getting and totally disrespecting boundaries to an actual illegal level. I asked her, like, why did you do that? And again, no accountability, like literally none. Like, could not accept that was blatantly the wrong thing to do, that she was totally out of line for doing that, and she shouldn't have done that. It was none of her business. And again, she's not going to be out when she's like planting seeds of fear, gossiping, and like running a whole giant ass smear campaign on her own kid. She's not telling people these things. That's why you don't listen to gossip or make a judgment call, especially not to the one that a lot of these people made. You don't do that based on the opinion of a Jezebel narc. Okay, and you also don't medicate kids based on that. This custody case, and like this is Nick's whole hill to stand on. And the thing is like he was trying to paint me as somebody who's like not interested in like the medical care of her child and all that. And it's like, dude, I have taken these kids to every appointment. My other child is medicated. I am medicated for ADHD. So how can you claim that? No. I've always been open to hearing suggestions. I'm open to recommendations, but ultimately I get the final say. And when my child has not had a firm handle on or an environment that is conducive of him feeling safe to express himself, I'm not going to medicate him. When he has all of these changes going on because you just met a woman, had her move into your house in like 2 months, she has multiple children, one of which she didn't even raise, at least one. And then you buy a house, you move. First you move back in with your parents for a little bit. Like there's all this like, and then you get married. But like Nick doesn't have any, like this is how this dude is like. And again, I'm not like fighting with him about this, but it's like, no, I'm not going to explain this. Like the answer is no. I'm not opposed to it in the future, but right now it's not affecting him. Well, he didn't win. He didn't win anything really in that. Everything was basically the same with the exception of that he had to take part in 12 weeks of family therapy to work on communication. Because if you can't communicate with the other parent, then you can't co-parent. He signed that agreement. He signed that. And you're working with a grandparent for which you shouldn't even be in collaboration with because a boundary was laid down with you and your wife, you and your family, my mother. So you're not respecting that as a way to get back at me, to like punish me so you can like feel big about your ego, which was just straight up weird, and trigger a response off of me. Because remember, these are Satanists we're talking about. Their entire goal is to trigger you because they want to be able to feed the narrative that there's something wrong with you and not the fact that they're a complete jackass, Satan worshiping freak who does deletion and ending magics at their own friends and their own family for financial gain. If you didn't want this talked about, then you should have backed the hell up a long time ago. I don't know how much more you expect people just to lay down and take your bullshit. That's not going to happen. And when the justice system stops being just, when they stop doing their job, like Judge Thomas O'Malley from Cuyahoga County Juvenile, the one who signed the first court order for Nick to go to therapy, but then a year and a half later signs an emergency order for which the mother was not even served a court date for, and they don't have a signature for that, and they know I wasn't served, and to issue a warrant for a family custody case that I wasn't even served a court date for. It's like it was very obvious right from the jump. But this judge then has the audacity to give custody to the person who did not even complete the first court order. Did Judge Thomas O'Malley ever ask Nick, hey, did you complete that therapy? Did you go to 12 weeks of family therapy like I ordered you to go to in that first court order that you signed? All that one question would have had him dismiss that case because Nick would have had to say no, unless he lied and said he did, which is possible. I don't know. I wasn't there because I didn't receive a court date. You know where I was? I was in the house taking care of our son who had COVID. That's where I was. Our son who had COVID, who Nick didn't even inform me had COVID until he was with me. Why do you think that is? Because Nick and his disgusting wife and everybody else that is a part of this agenda is more concerned about financial gain than the well-being of a child, than the well-being of either of my children, definitely than the well-being of me, because ultimately they all thought I was going to be dead. But that's not happening. You will be seeing the inside of a prison. So once we got through all of that though, and I sold my house on my own, got through all of that, even the obstacles they tried to put in front of me in regards to selling my home, like the whole little bullshit they tried to create with the appraiser and the HVAC that Chris Skamansky, who installed my HVAC, installed the drain valve, the release valve from the HVAC system that he put into my house, had the line, the drain valve, going directly into the house. So there was a few hangups that I had to deal with. And since Nick, who hired Chris Skamansky, wouldn't reach back out to him because they made a little side deal, I had no choice but to deal with that on my own. Because the person who was paid to install that never got a permit or installed it correctly, and I didn't find out about it until I had to get an inspection on the house. So there was a whole slew of things that I had to get through on my own. So all of these men who have a damn thing to say about me, who weren't present for any of that, weren't present when I sold my home, weren't present when I moved, weren't present for any of that, you should probably pipe down, okay? Damn sure should pipe down about my mental health, about my independence, about anything regarding me. Okay, maybe you should step out of that feminine energy that you're giving. And then you would have actually shown up, been present, acted like an actual man. Then maybe you wouldn't feel compelled to break people and dominate them, right? Because if you were actually leading somebody, you would have to be present through action, right? Through all of that, I move. And then within a few months, William has to adjust. We have to go through the whole school thing, and then the superintendent, Ryba, I'll get to him later in a future video. This is how disgusting these animals are. And every last one of you are going to be held accountable. And if you did not want to be held accountable, why would you behave the way that you did? You don't get to be a judge, a magistrate, a doctor. You don't get to be anybody who is in a seat of power where you are in a position to be advocating for children and then put your own personal interest first before children and expect that that is never going to come back to bite you. Because sooner or later, God is going to align you with someone like me who is self-aware, who is accountable, who is honest, who has integrity, who understands when to lean back and to stand my ground, like I'm doing right now and will continue to do until my child is returned to me and until all of the rodents who took part in this hellacious hate crime are dealt with and fully exposed and punished, don't forget, accountable, just like they wanted me to be accountable, just like they forced my son to be courageous, then they should be courageous. They wanted to hold my son in fear, well, now they can be held in fear. Sorry, you took outrageous action here. It's very stupid. And all of you are proving through your own actions that you are a danger, that you actually have some serious mental issues, some serious emotional disturbances. Because when you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, once again, that is pretty much the definition of fucking crazy. I had taken all of the steps necessary to set myself up for success, despite all of the man-made warfare, despite all of their efforts. All those boundaries were in place, all those cycles, and again, I started manifesting my reality. And I did it on my own, with no help from any of these people. Naturally, because they had an agenda. And every time you start to heal, every time you start to become more aware of the actual goal, because again, you're not meant to understand evil, psychopathic, narcissistic creepazoids who are willing to sacrifice another human life for financial gain. And that is exactly what we're dealing with here. And by the way, that is actual voodoo. That is actually what all of these secret societies, go look at the Diddy docket, Demora Helly, go look, you'll see. This is what they do. This is actual voodoo. This is what it is. The glamorized like candles and all the bullshit they show you on social media, that's not voodoo. That's not black magic. Are willing to use their position to harm other people, especially children. That is a big mistake. I promise you will not be successful. God won't allow it. God will not allow it. So you could be the dipshit that plays into that. I mean, any judge at this point that would still be risking their position, their credibility, their reputation to be a part of something corrupt, I'm sorry. Like, that is just, I don't know. Like, it's like, are you seeing what's happening in the world at all? Like, are you seeing? I can understand, like, somebody that's just your average, typical, like cop or, security guard or something like that bounces from department to department every time they, do something illegal or corrupt. Like, you can kind of expect that from them to, like, have zero self-awareness. But in the position of a judge that's, like, in charge of, like, managing the safety and the care of children, like, and especially, again, the blazing boldness of it. Y'all, I have no criminal record. I have no addictions. I've been independent my whole life. I've never had a history of any drug abuse. I've never had a history of any kind of criminal record. I have literally been independent my entire life. I was a leader for a good portion of that. This is who this judge decided to not do his job on. Somebody who raised a child all on her own when the parent died of a drug overdose. Somebody who co-parented with another man for 10 years, for which I also was independent and never married. So why does he get an opinion on anything in regards to my life? Because it seems like the only thing that Judge Thomas O'Malley was looking at was Nick's opinion regarding my life, which is actually none of Nick's business at all. If William, who by the way is the best evidence of the mother that I am, women-hating douchebags, decided to run a plot on my life for financial gain, like if that were to happen. And I have to be able to think on my feet. I have to make some adjustments quickly because, they're intentionally making sure that it goes the way that they want it to go. Like they're intentionally trying to shove you into a narrative because they don't want to turn out looking like the pieces of actual dog shit that they actually are. You have to have some flexibility and think quick on your feet because you have people actually trying to take you out. It was an observance of the connection here. And because I had taken all of the steps necessary throughout all of this, like the FBI report I made 2 years ago at the start of all of this, and an agent there told me I should just go get another job, that kind of was a giveaway for what I might actually be dealing with here. Definitely not an agent, definitely not a federal agent that was interested in actually doing her job. That was at the Cleveland local office, by the way. Let's hope she doesn't work there anymore. She's not actually interested in following the law herself or doing her job. Had they done that, none of this would have been happening. And then, the subsequent 4 other visits that I made there, the 3 to the Brunswick Police Department, the 3 to the Medina County Sheriff. There's a sheriff there. Inquisitive fella. It's going again with this ADHD bullshit. Here we go again. It's like, dude, we've already talked to, the family provider. You've been told what you need to do. You need to do it. You're not doing it. He starts telling me about how William is having, tantrums and he's being triggered and all of this stuff. And I'm like, that's not happening in my house. I don't know what to tell you. And again, because he's trying intentionally to drive a narrative at the expense of his own child's well-being, he is intentionally and knowingly creating that dissonance. That was what is happening. He's creating an environment that is causing my son to want to withdraw within, but then projecting at me and trying to get me to come into agreement that it has anything to do with me. But I'm like, no. Sorry. And then when he wants to keep going with it, trying to actually devalue me, starts calling me names, starts being completely abusive in his language, and then I block him because I don't have to put up with that shit. And you're delusional as hell if you feel like any woman should have to put up with somebody who she's been separated from 10 years ago, attempting to give him the benefit of co-parenting all the way in her lane, attempting to build a bridge with your new wife and her family. And you want to still come for me? Nah. Then I come to understand when my son uses the word used for self-deletion at school. But then the school, here we go again, doesn't invite me initially into the conversation, calls Nick, leaves my son in the office, calls Nick. All of these people are going to be held accountable. If you don't take accountability before you are made to be held accountable, just know you will be held accountable for the role that you played. Just know you've already been investigated, whether you know it or not. Sorry. Nick calls me and I'm like, what? William saying that word. Naturally, I'm horrified. Because I had never heard William say anything like that. I never even had a remote concern about anything like that. William is a very happy kid, at least when he's with me and his sister. And so William comes home and he's devastated, okay? He's just had all of these people make him feel about this big because he asked a question, he said that word.